미국은 은행에 23조 달러 이상이 보관되어 있으며 성인의 94%가 은행 계좌를 가지고 있습니다.
Banks are critical to the American economy. Credit is the lifeblood of the economy. Banks are like the heart of our economy that pump credit, the blood, throughout the financial system.
They bring lenders together with corporates, individuals who need financing. The deposits that they hold for institutional and retail clients, they help fund the economy, they help make the economy grow.
그러나 다른 금융기관과 마찬가지로 은행도 파산할 수 있습니다. FDIC에 따르면 2001년 이후 550개 이상의 은행이 파산했습니다.
The first year in American history where not a single bank failed was 2005. Before 2005, at least one bank had failed in every year in American history.
It's cyclical. We have periods of time where the economy is doing well, things are stable, and we have years where there are no failures at all. And then we have other episodes where we go through recession or some kind of financial stress and failures spike.
실리콘밸리뱅크, 시그니처뱅크 및 크레딧 스위스의 파산은 신뢰하는 금융기관이 얼마나 빨리 실패하여 수십억 달러를 위험하게 만드는지를 명확하게 보여줍니다.
It's the largest bank meltdown since the Great Recession more than a decade ago.
그렇다면 은행이 파산하는 원인은 무엇일까요? 그리고 그것은 미국 경제에 어떠한 영향을 미칠까요? 은행을 파산시킬 수 있는 위험 요소 3가지가 있습니다.
We have credit risk when they make loans. Institutions and the individuals are making loans to, they're exposed to default on those loans. So banks carry credit risk. Secondly, they have interest rate risk. They have assets that have a particular interest rate risk profile. They have liabilities, and one of the jobs of a bank is to match the interest rate profile of assets and liabilities and to try to minimize that interest rate risk. And they have liquidity risk as well.
이러한 위험 요인들이 은행의 유동성이나 지불 능력에 영향을 미칠 때 은행은 파산 가능성이 있습니다. 지불 능력은 은행의 장기 의무 및 부채를 충당할 수 있는 능력을 말하며 이는 은행의 총 자산이 부채를 충당할 수 있음을 의미합니다.
In terms of solvency, this is generally when banks have a lot of loans go bad. The way that banks make money is that they bring deposits in and then they lend that money out on the premise that they're going to collect those loans back. And they collect those loans back with a little bit of interest. They pay some of that interest to the depositors and they keep the rest. Well, if banks have loans that go bad, that's money that's not coming back into the bank. And if you have enough of those go bad, it can cause the bank to fail, where there's not enough money coming in to pay those depositors that they've gotten the money from.
워싱턴 뮤추얼을 포함한 많은 은행들이 2008년 경기 침체 기간 동안 파산한 것이 미국 역사상 가장 큰 은행 파산이었습니다.
If you recall back in the aughts, a lot of people were getting adjustable rate mortgages, and they were getting mortgages that were often referred to as ninja loans or ninja mortgages, which was no income, no job, no assets. They would get people into a mortgage with a very low teaser rate, maybe half the rate of what you would actually pay. But after 6 months or a year or 2 years, then the rate would adjust to market rates. Well, if you're barely able to afford that mortgage at the teaser rate, that introductory rate they gave you, once those rates jumped, people couldn't afford those mortgages anymore, and they began to default on those mortgages. And so Washington Mutual had a lot of these. And so you saw this with a lot of banks in that 2008, 2009, 2010 timeframe.
유동성은 은행이 단기 의무를 수행하는데 얼마나 많은 돈을 가지고 있는지를 보여주는 지표입니다.
When you put your money in the bank, you're entitled to that money whenever you want. That's the promise that's been made. The bank takes that money and lends. It lends to people for mortgages for 30 years, for cars for 5 or 7 years, for all these loans that are a long time. So they have a mismatch of their timing between what they owe you in your deposits immediately and what they own, which are these assets that are long-term. Liquidity is when a bank has a crunch. Generally, depositors want their money immediately, and the bank has more demands for that immediate money than they have assets that they can liquidate in order to get people their money. So they fail due to a crisis of liquidity.
실리콘밸리뱅크가 미국 역사상 파산한 은행 중 두 번째로 큰 은행이 된 것은 유동성 문제 때문이었습니다.
Do you remember when you could get a mortgage at 3 or 4%? That mortgage got put into a big pool, and SVB was one of the buyers of that. Now, when interest rates rose sharply, those cheap mortgages were worth less When people are afraid that a bank doesn't have as much capital, that its assets aren't there, they become jittery and they want their money and they try to make a deposit run. So a handful of businesses wanted their money. SVB had a liquidity problem. That was immediately why it failed. There was a run on the bank. No bank can withstand everybody asking for its money back at the same time. Right? And that happened.
은행이 파산하면 연방예금보험국 FDIC가 개입합니다. 1933년에 처음 설립된 이 조직은 예금자를 보호하고 미국 은행 시스템에 대한 신뢰를 높이기 위해 만들어졌습니다.
The FDIC, this is their kind of bread and butter. They know how to unwind the bank in kind of the least harmful way.
대부분의 경우 FDIC는 파산한 은행의 일부 혹은 전부를 건전한 은행에 매각하려고 시도합니다.
Another bank comes in and will take over all of the loans or most of the loans of the bank and their deposits. And if there's a mismatch between the loans and investments that they're getting and the deposits that they're getting, then the FDIC may have to put some money into the pot to make it attractive for another bank to take that over.
다른 경우 FDIC는 보다 복잡한 접근 방법을
In the
취합니다.
case of Silicon Valley Bank, what they did is take possession of the bank and then basically create what they call a bridge bank. And the idea of this bridge bank is to get the depositors their money and then collect on any loans that they might have. In essence, what they're going to do is liquidate this bank so that the bank no longer exists.
그럼에도 불구하고 FDIC 보험을 가진 은행의 예금자는 한 사람당 최대 25만 불까지 보호받습니다. FDIC 보험은 예금자들의 패닉을 예방하는데 매우 중요한 역할을 합니다.
The whole purpose of deposit insurance, which is what the FDIC was created to do, is to say, okay, the reason why you're trying to pull out your money is because you think if you wait too long and this bank fails, your money won't be there. So what if we back your money and we say, even in the case of this bank was to fail, we will insure you up to a certain point.
그러나 모든 은행들이 FDIC 보험에 가입되어 있지는 않습니다. 연방정부는 2023년도에 실리콘밸리 뱅크의 모든 예금자들에게 보험 한도를 넘는 금액의 95% 이상을 보호해 주겠다는 논란의 여지가 많은 조치를 취했습니다.
I am very concerned that we're setting a precedent towards unlimited government support for every dollar in the banking system.
There's now an expectation in a similar event they would do the same thing, and if that's the case, it really needs to be addressed in a much more comprehensive way, and that would presumably involve raising the deposit insurance limits and having the deposit insurance premiums reflect that accordingly.
그럼에도 불구하고 정부의 신속한 조치는 도미노 효과로 이루어질 수 있는 은행 파산을 억제하는 데 매우 도움이 됩니다.
Definitely the potential for dominoes. And the dominoes are, well, if we don't know if this bank's solvent, what's the next?
Sometimes it's an oil crisis or a farm crisis, housing market, and the great financial crisis. These are all things that large numbers of banks have exposure to.
You have banks that are doing the same things that at one point might have seemed safe, but at the extremes are not safe, and then something triggers it so that those dominoes start to fall.
은행의 파산은 미국 경제에 큰 악영향을 미칠 수 있습니다.
All we have to do is go back to the financial crisis of 2008, the failure of those financial institutions. It greatly restricted and constricted the economy.
Banks have to conserve their capital. They do that by tightening their lending standards. And as they tighten their lending standards, there's less credit flowing through the economy. And that contraction of credit is a negative impulse to economic growth. It can trigger either economic slowdowns or more seriously could lead us into economic recessions.
그렇다면 은행의 파산을 예방하고 완충할 수 있는 충분한 규제가 있을까요? 전문가들은 잘못된 질문이라고 말합니다.
People are asking the question, did we get the rules right? Well, there's a more elementary question. Did we enforce the rules right? And the answer is no.
If you look at what the regulators were doing with SVB as recently as 2019 and more recently even, they were warning that things need to be changed here, that they're taking on additional interest rate risks, that they're going to have some potential liquidity problems in the event that interest rates begin to rise.
There were failures of supervision done by the Federal Reserve, obvious and rampant throughout Silicon Valley Bank and potentially others.
실리콘밸리 뱅크의 파산은 규제 완화의 위험성도 보여주었습니다. 몇몇 정치인들과 연구원들은 닷프랭크 규정의 완화를 실패의 주요 원인이라고 비난했습니다.
We start doing what's known as stress tests where the Federal Reserve, create these hypothetical situations of our economy in distress in various ways, and then use these simulations for the bank, and based on how the bank is right now, how will you survive, a period of stress, right? So we start doing all these things, and it's great. And then literally on the 10th year anniversary of Dodd-Frank passing, 2018, we see, and under the Trump administration, there is now this call to deregulate a bit, right?
What we're doing today with respect to Dodd-Frank is truly important legislation. And I have to say, for a Congress that they say, won't be doing much because we have an election coming up, I think we're doing an awful lot when you think about it.
They raised the limit up to 250 billion that were subject to some additional scrutiny from 50 billion. And so SVB happened to fall in that category of between 50 billion and 250. So when they raised that to 250, they weren't subject to this greater scrutiny.
Deregulation is not the answer, right? We keep trying that and we keep failing, right? So at some point, we need to stop this game that we're playing with ourselves.
패닉은 은행 파산에 대한 올바른 반응이 결코 아닙니다. 여기서 우리는 배울 교훈이 있습니다.
All in all, the U.S. banking system is safe and sound. For individuals, though, it doesn't hurt to take a look at the financial health of your financial institution, your bank, if you happen to have more than the insured amount. And unless you're having to make payroll, if it's your savings that we're talking about, then it might make sense for you to spread that money out just for your peace of mind. Because if you are banking with a small community bank and something were to happen to that bank, it's unlikely, but if something were, it's unlikely that the regulators are going to come in and guarantee all of your deposits. They would only be guaranteeing up to that $250,000.